Imagine a forest so old, it remembers a time before time. Its trees whisper tales of forgotten civilizations, ancient rituals, and secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. What if every rustle of leaves was a voice from the past, trying to tell you something profound and unsettling? Join us as we venture into the whispering forest and unveil its deepest, darkest mysteries. I recorded that introduction on the drive there, half to amuse myself and half to test the new microphone mounted on my dashboard. The waveform jittered on the screen like a small heart, beating as the road narrowed from highway to gravel, gravel to dirt, and dirt to a pair of furrows swallowed by brush. By the time my GPS lost its nerve and went blank, the sun had thinned into spears of white through clouds, and all sounds seemed to pool somewhere behind me. The locals didn't call it the Whispering Forest. They called it the Old Place, the wood that stays. There were stories about compasses spinning and birds refusing to nest in the interior, about a ring of stones the farmers didn't plow. When I asked a woman at the last petrol station for directions, she'd tapped her cigarette ash into her coffee and said, "You'll hear it before you see it." She didn't mean cicadas. She meant something that would reach into the soft place behind your ears and turn. At the tree line, I shouldered my pack and stood for a moment, letting my city-bred eyes unknot. The first trunks rose like pillars of a drowned cathedral, bark furred with old lichen and stitched with vertical scars. The air smelled green and mineral, the crushed spine scent of fern, the rust of wet stone. Underfoot, the ground sighed, the leaf litter was deep, woven with twigs and old feathers and something else like fine hair. I crouched and pinched a tuft, not hair. Mycelial threads, delicate and white, luminous in the dim. They dissolved under the heat of my fingers. "Okay," I said into my recorder, a habit that made me feel less alone. Entering the whispering forest at 14:22. Sky overcast, slight northerly wind, immediate observation, silence, no birdsong, not even a woodpecker. The quiet isn't empty, though. It has texture, almost as if the trees are carrying sound in their bodies instead of letting it go. I walked. It wasn't wilderness the way the brochures like to pretend. There were signs of human passage. A cut log foxed with moss, a bit of blue twine strangling a sapling, an old beer can blistered by oxidation. And there were older signs, a stump that had grown a green skirt of shelf fungus like layered fans, a boulder carved by water into a basin where rain collected and reflected a shattered sky. The path narrowed, then forgot it had been a path. The light had a weight to it, like a wool blanket laid over my shoulders. When I stopped to drink, the wind blew once, and the leaves made a sound that wasn't wind, the close-mouthed murmur of a crowd waiting for a verdict. I told myself it was pareidolia, the brain's tendency to hear patterns in noise, faces in clouds. I told myself a lot of things to explain the prickle running across my scalp. The first truly odd thing was not sound, but edge. The edge of a leaf, oak, broad and lobed, had ridges like ridges of fingerprints. I rolled the leaf between my fingers and felt them. Not insect damage. Not a disease. Raised lines in a pattern that looked like writing until the eye tried to focus, whereupon it slipped. The ridges were warm, as if the leaf were remembering sunlight. I put the leaf in a specimen envelope and kept walking. By late afternoon, I found it. The ring of stones. Half sunken in moss, they formed a rough circle around a tree older than math. Its roots rose in ropes from the ground and re-entered, like the forest had been laid over a sleeping animal with too many sinews. The trunk had that same vertical scarring I'd seen at the perimeter, but here it was deeper. 100 narrow furrows the width of fingernails, each darkened with sap that had dried into glass. When the light shifted, I could see my face reflected in those charred mirrors. I raised my recorder, intending to describe the scene, and realized my own voice had a slight echo before I hit record. I heard myself in the leaves, a fraction of a second before I spoke. I camped near the ring, more because the thought of losing the spot unnerved me than because it was practical. The air felt like a library, still, dustless, expectant. I set up the small stove, boiled water for noodles, and listened, because listening felt less like work than speaking. That was when the first footstep came, somewhere to my left. A single shift of weight on the damp floor, leaf on leaf. Then silence again. It didn't repeat when I turned my head. When I turned back to the pot, steam rising with a faint vegetable sweetness, The footstep came from the other side. "Deer," I told the recorder softly, "or a boar." But there were no other sounds, no snort, no bark, no crack of brush. When I ate, something exhaled behind me, hot enough to carry a trace of sour on the air, of something that had eaten something and regretted it. Night came in a slow convulsion. The cloud ceiling loosened and then settled, a low lid. My fire puckered and asked for more wood. I fed it carefully, not wanting to advertise. In the dark, just beyond the light, I saw flecks that shifted, flickered, arranged themselves into a suggestion of eyes, and then broke apart into nothing. Once, a shape the size of a stag drifted between trunks, pale and antlered with bare branch, and I told myself it was a trick of parallax. The second time it passed, I noticed it moved without moving, like a picture on thin paper blown across a tabletop. I held the recorder and didn't speak at all, afraid that if I did, the words would find their way into the leaves and not back out. Something clicked farther off, a dry, precise sound like a tongue tapping a tooth. I slept in the shelter of a root and woke to a whisper in my ear that stopped the instant my eyelids lifted. Not words. The shape of words, smoothing themselves against the shape of my ear. I tried to laugh and heard a second laugh in answer, unspooling from the canopy with a texture like silk torn slowly. I packed badly, leaving a spoon on the ground. When I noticed and turned back, the spoon was propped against the old tree's trunk, as if it had been set there for me to find. There were no tracks in the leaf litter. My own prints were smug and obvious, a trail of darker, compacted ovals. Nothing else had pressed the ground. I moved on at first light to keep from thinking. The forest deepened by degrees, until light itself seemed to have been kneaded into the bark and the air. I came to a slope where the ground puckered with ancient burrows. It was where I found the steps subsided into the leaf rot, 3 flat stones in a kiss of an arc, lips chapped by roots. The stones were hand-cut. On their faces the lichen had grown in a regularity that argued with randomness. The pattern was a spiral, not the naive spiral of a child, but the kind that binds seeds in the heart of a sunflower. It pulled my gaze. It pulled. Down below, where the spiral would have had its center, the ground dipped and the trees pressed closer. A darkness pooled there that wasn't shade. I felt it on my skin like a magnetic field. The wind had died completely, but the leaves still moved, as if the trees were speaking to one another with their fingers. I made 3 circuits of the depression with my recorder on. When I played it back at lunch, it was like listening to a room that had learned to breathe. Soft inhalations, soft exhalations, and in the spacing between them, syllables that wanted to be. They weren't any language I knew, and yet my mouth tried to form them as I listened, my tongue shaping on its own. That afternoon, my compass stopped pointing. I could feel its distress through my thumb. The needle juddered, then made an exhausted circle and lay flat. Perhaps there was iron in the ground, a seam disrupting the field. I put the compass in my pocket and listened to the click of my tongue against my teeth to keep my bearings. Each click returned a shape of the space that didn't match what my eyes told me. The trees were closer than they looked. The depression was bigger. The path behind me had filled in with green. When evening folded again, the forest's voices grew more confident. They didn't pretend to be wind anymore. They were full of the small human behaviors that live at the edges of language, the cough you use to ask for permission to speak, the breath you take when you've decided not to. I ate and drank mechanically. The fire threw shadows in sheets against the root of the old tree. They moved in a rhythm that was not mine. On the recorder, when I checked it once, a voice, my voice, "Welcome back." I hadn't said that. I did not sleep so much as pass into a deeper form of listening, the way your hearing changes when you submerge in a bath. I dreamed of a circle of people standing where I stood, each with a hand to the trunk and a mouth open as though in laughter or scream. They weren't speaking. The tree was speaking through them, pushing their tongues aside. Their eyes were rolled, whites bright in the green dark. Sap slicked their cheeks. A figure in the center, a woman in bark-colored cloth, cut seams into the tree with a thin blade, and the tree bled syllables that clattered like pebbles in a metal bowl. When I woke, I found the blade beside me. It was small and old, a sliver of iron with a broken tang, wrapped in what had once been leather and was now a smooth vegetable brown. It fit into my hand with the intimacy of a handshake. I dropped it, then picked it up again without meaning to. On the bark of the old tree, where the vertical scars ran and paneled into each other like shutters, there was a fresh seam, wet and gleaming. I hadn't made it. I told myself I hadn't. The blade made a sound when I ran my nail along it, an almost voice, a tuning fork's ghost. The forest leaned in. I could feel it in the tilt of the trunks, in the way the moss brightened in the corner of my eye and dimmed in direct sight. It wanted something from me, not the way a predator wants meat, but the way an archivist wants a full record, with hunger disguised as care. The true threat, I said aloud because saying it made me brave for a second, isn't what lives here. It's what this place does with you, your words, your thoughts. It takes them and shelves them. My breath smoked in the cold morning. I could see damp on my wrists that wasn't sweat. I could taste a preservative in the air, tannic and astringent, like the inside of an old library book. It was midday when the deer came. I call it a deer because that is how my brain first mapped it. 4 limbs, a neck, a head, antlers. But each element was wrong, borrowed from other things, assembled with a child's guesswork. The limbs were roots, the neck a plate of vines, the head an egg of wood that had never been finished, hidden by a scrawl of branches that suggested a muzzle. It stepped lightly into the ring of stones and tilted, as if to consider me. In that tilt was something that had learned posture from watching us. My bowels went liquid. I stood anyway and raised the blade. "Go," I told it, my voice breaking on the vowel. "Go." It leaned nearer. The antlers chimed faintly when they touched, an ice sound in warm air. Something like breath issued from the gaps and carried with it the smell of wet coins. I stepped back and my heel found the edge of the depression. My stomach remembered standing on rooftops and looking over. The deer thing lifted one root foot and set it down carefully on the recorder. The device crackled and went dark. That was the moment the forest took my name. Not my legal name, the one on my passport. The one I use when I laugh, when I swear at boiling water, when I call after a friend who's already turned the corner. The leaf chatter rose and said it, and when I tried to say it back, the word failed. It had been moved from the shelf where I keep it into a different shelf somewhere else. I could see the space it left and the dust. I ran. The trees did not try to stop me in the way of the blunt world. No roots rose to trip, no branches swung. The path grew generous again. The light slanted into luminous honey. It felt like mercy until I realized I was running downhill for far too long without ever having climbed. The spiral steps appeared to my right when I could not possibly be near them. My lungs burned, and something in my throat made a raw, high sound that refused to be a scream. I had the blade in my fist and nothing else. The recorder lay on the ground where the deer had folded it with the patience of a bookbinder. At the bottom of the false slope, the ground opened into another circle, wider, lower, with stones only the size of ankles, half swallowed. And in the center, if the forest has a center, stood a tree like a black candle that had been lit and extinguished 1,000 times. Its bark had run and cooled in tears. The vertical scars here were not scars. They were mouths. Not shaped like ours, but the suggestion of opening and closing, the articulation of flex and seal. As the canopy shifted, the little mouths shivered, and the sound they made was speech if your mouth was full of leaves. I thought of the blade. I thought of the fresh seam. I understood then that my part in this was not to cut the tree. It was to be cut by it. The woman from my dream waited at the edge of the circle. She was not a ghost. Ghosts do not cast such thick shadows. Her face had the same ordinary beauty you see on coins, symmetrical and distant. Her hair was gathered with strips of bark, and her hands were stained the color of tea. When she spoke, her voice was not the voice of the forest. It was a human voice with other voices living in it, crowded, courteous. "You came back," she said, as if that were both accurate and a kindness. "I've never been here," I said. My mouth struggled around the vowels. My missing name throbbed. "You left something here," she said. "They always do." She tipped her chin at the small blade, and I realized with a cold that had nothing to do with air that my hand had been holding it correctly all along, wrist angled, ready for the upward cut you'd use to open skin shallowly. "I don't want," I began and then stopped because it wasn't true. Want is a spectrum. Somewhere on it, I wanted to hear what the forest had to say when it wasn't speaking through leaves or deer. Somewhere on it, I wanted to be part of something that didn't forget. My life at home was lists, deadlines, episodes to schedule, stories to shape and throw into the unfeeling algorithm. Here was an algorithm so old it didn't need us, and yet it did, a little, as a lens, a throat, a tongue. The woman held out her hand, palm up. "You'll tell us, and we'll keep it." Her smile was not cruel. It was not kind. It was the smile a librarian wears when a rare book comes home. I stepped back. The little mouths on the blackened tree flexed, soft, and exhaled. My missing name blew across my cheeks, cool as a mother's hand. I nearly stepped forward then, reflex more than consent. Somewhere above us, a branch cracked with the dry report of a gunshot. In the echo, I heard the dear thing moving, the brush whispering like skirts. I saw myself years later, standing in the same circle with sap on my face, my thoughts laid open and filed. I saw voices as thin as spider silk stretched between trunks, and each carried a person's favorite word, their earliest lie, their last apology. The taste that rose in the back of my mouth was a child's taste, summer caught in old teeth, pennies, nettles, the thud of a fall in high grass. And over all of it, a desire like a rope pulled tight. Belong, belong, belong. Something of me rebelled. Not the part that worries about deadlines or rent, something bone-deep and feral that remembers unaffiliated freedom. I dropped the blade. I put my hands to my mouth and bit down hard on my own skin until blood came, copper and electric. My blood answered the forest with a language it could not file. Pain in the present tense, I shouted, not words. A sound that was only sound. The woman flinched, just once, the little mouths stilled, listening. "Stories have shape," I panted. "You make everything into shape, not this." And I screamed again, louder, a sound full of breaking, of refusal. The spiral and the lichen faltered. The dear thing stamped and shuddered as if startled from a grazing thought. The trees drew back a fraction, a courtesy misunderstood or a gust that found them at last. The woman's eyes at last held something like fear, or maybe it was respect for the novelty. "You can leave," she said. "You won't stay gone." I left. The forest did not trap me with roots or lies. It only let me go. The path smoothed, and the smell of the outside world crept in. Petrol, cold water, the faint ghost of baking bread from a village beyond the next ridge. I did not run. Running felt like a word the forest would catch. I walked until the light lost its green and the air let sound go freely again. At the tree line, I turned back. The dark within the forest was an animal's pupil, briefly dilating. I felt something tug in my chest, a hook gently set. In the car, my hands shook so badly, I clicked the seatbelt into the wrong place 3 times. My phone had no voice messages, but when I opened the recording app, there was a new file with a timestamp that matched the moment I had screamed. I played it. There was a breath, there was a shiver of leaves, there was my voice saying, in a tone I have used to end episodes and reassure audiences, "This has been the Whispering Forest's ancient forgotten secrets. Thank you for listening." I'd never said that sentence out loud. At home, the cut in my palm knitted fast, too fast, edges sticking as if glued with sap. The night after I returned, I woke to the sound of someone in the hallway whispering my missing name back to me. Slowly, syllables luxuriously articulated, the way you savor the first bite of an apple. I have found that words I didn't know I knew slip into my sentences. When I hold a leaf, any leaf, there are ridges under my fingers. I avoid libraries, not because I don't love them, but because when the pages whisper to one another, I can't tell which voices are mine. I still have the blade. It should have rusted. It hasn't. Sometimes it hums when I stand by the window and the wind combs the street trees into saying nothing important. I keep it in a drawer I've labeled miscellaneous, as if a bland word could remain inert around a thing like that. When I sleep, I dream of the circle and the woman and the tree with its small, articulate mouths. When I wake, there is dirt under my nails and a taste of wet coins on my tongue. You will ask if this is a warning. It is, and it isn't. The old place is not a monster in the shape of a forest. It is a memory with roots. It wants to keep you. It wants to put what you are into a structure that knows how to last. It is patient. It can wait until what you call yourself thins with time and becomes antique. It can wait until you find yourself at your own door with a leaf in your hand that you can't stop stroking because the ridges mean something you almost remember. Sometimes the wind rises and the city trees whisper. The sound is almost like the quiet in a church when everyone stands at once. When it happens, I open the drawer and take out the blade and put it on the table and tell myself, again, the story that has no shape. A man stood at the edge of a forest and didn't step in. He put his hand to his mouth and bit until there was only this moment, this breath, this blood in his mouth, this unfiled pain. And he stayed outside. It is not a good story. It doesn't end so much as stop. But some nights it holds the door closed just long enough for morning. Other nights I wake with dirt on my tongue and the taste of rain and iron and a sentence in my throat I don't dare write down, because if I do, the leaves will learn it, and the next person who enters the old place will hear me say it a fraction of a second before they do, and think, how kind of them to welcome me. I told myself I was returning for closure, a therapist's word, a neat ribbon to tie around a box I'd taped shut a long time ago and shoved into a mental attic. But when I pushed through the warped front door of Building 17 and smelled the damp plaster and old electricity, closure felt like a flimsy excuse for something uglier, curiosity with a dare inside it. They were going to tear it down next week. The caretaker, an old man whose eyes had the glazed patience of fish, met me at the stoop and gave me a key that felt too cold for August. "One night," he said. "No lights in the hallways after 10. Generators don't like the weather." I promised I wouldn't linger in the forbidden places. He didn't laugh, just scratched his jaw and looked past me into the stairwell as if someone had been standing there a second ago. I climbed. The banister was smooth in patches where 1,000 hands had polished it with fear and boredom. My boots stuck to a sugared layer of grit on each step. The elevator had been out since I was a kid. We used to dare each other to open the gate and spit down the shaft until we heard the long, wet clatter deck the bottom. Kids do small, awful things without imagination for how they echo. By the time I reached the 5th floor, I was damp under my shirt, breath tasting of wheat and copper. The hallway was a keel of light, thin and shaky from naked bulbs. My old apartment, 5C, was at the end, on the angle where the corridor made an almost but not quite right-angled turn. That not quite always bothered me. It felt like a question that would never be answered because it had been asked wrongly. I unlocked 5C and pushed in. The room was unfamiliar, the way a friend's face becomes strange when you only look at their ears and mouth. It was mine, but someone had stripped the personality from it. The windows were bare. The floor was belly-up linoleum with a pattern like drought. Dust made its own climate. The corners were the only things that seemed unchanged. 2 hard right angles at either end of the wall, the deeper shadow where they met the ceiling like folds you wouldn't stick your fingers into. When I was 8, I thought something lived in those folds. Mom would wedge a chair under my door each night after she kissed my forehead. She'd leave the hallway light on too bright, bleaching the world into paper. "If you hear anything," she used to say, "that's just building noises. The old girl settling." But you don't tell building noises not to breathe like that. It was not a sound you could describe without embarrassing yourself. It was the feeling of a voice poured into a place voices don't belong, like a murmur in a jar, a whisper with all the words scooped out. I set my overnight bag on the counter and unrolled a thin foam mattress on the floor. I put my little LED lamp on a paint bucket and wept when it worked. Ridiculous relief at the yellowness of the light and how it filled the space without changing it. I turned on my phone's recording app and propped it against a rolled-up cloth. Not because I expected to catch anything, because sometimes ceremony is a way to lie to your fear. It was quiet enough that I could hear plaster cooling. The wind fiddled with the window even though it was shut. Somewhere above, footsteps paced and then stopped in the particular way of someone who realized they were pacing and sat down to think instead. I did the chores you do when you're trying not to look at the corners. I made tea on a camping stove. I unpeeled a granola bar as if it were a fragile creature that might break under the wrong kind of attention. I paced, then stopped in the particular way of someone who realized they were pacing. When I sat, finally, the room seemed to sigh in relief. The floor let me know where the joists were by the language of groans and ticks. The building settled a little, old bones popping. Then a shadow slipped in the left-hand corner, quick and polite, like someone peeking from behind a curtain to see if the play had started. I stared at the wall until my eyes watered. The lamp's light clipped cleanly at the edge of the angle. You don't realize how much of your life is curves until you spend a moment studying a perfect 90 degrees. You could fit something into that. Thin thing. Patient thing. I swallowed and told myself a story. That I had always been scared of corners because I was a child who counted angles to soothe myself. An odd little private ritual back before anyone gave me words like obsessive and intrusive. Maybe I had simply impressed that fear onto the geometry around me. There was nothing there. My phone clicked as the recording app rolled into a new file. A small, innocent sound. It sounded like the click I remembered most clearly from childhood. The click of the hall light as someone turned it off. Don't turn it off. The lamp flickered. Not much. Enough for the shadows to breathe and then hold it. Across the room, something tapped inside the wall. Mouse, I thought. Mouse, mouse, mouse. 3 slow taps, then a pause, then 2 faster taps. Not a mouse. Not the random rhythm of tiny desperation. It was the softest version of what, in our new century, people like me recognize with a little shiver, even when we don't believe. A knock. "You're in my head," I said to the corner. Saying it made me braver for a heartbeat, as if the sentence was a spear and I had thrown it correctly. The corner did not answer, but the air around it felt colder, as if the corner were a mouth that had just taken a deep breath. I walked to the kitchen and ran the tap until the water came out with more transparency than rust. I wasn't thirsty. I needed a reason to have my back to the corner without facing it. When I turned off the water, emptiness settled on my shoulders like a shawl. A shape stood in the reflection of the kitchen window, not sharp enough to claim, a human proposition. Moth-wing shoulders, a dark thread for a neck. It was positioned where the left corner would be if you watched the room in glass. Still soundless, as if it had been waiting much longer than I had been living. I turned around. The corner was a corner. No shape, no moth. My heart did the thing where it claws itself like a startled cat. The tea was too hot and I drank it anyway. By 8, the building had decided it was night. Somewhere, a door closed and did not open again. The outside world faded. Vans and shouting boys, and a woman haggling over cigarettes at the bodega. Sound receding as if I were falling backward down a tunnel. I moved the lamp closer, so its circle of light pushed hard at the corners and rounded them a little with reflection. Then I remembered something my father had said the year before he left. Don't fill every corner. Leave one free so the room can breathe. He'd been building cheap bookcases back then, across the angles to keep my toys from rolling into the void. Mom thought he was being practical. He had the look of a man laying traps. I finished my tea and replayed the memory until it grew teeth. Leave one free. Why? So something could get out? Or get in? I hauled my bag to the center of the room and sat with my back to the window and looked at the 2 far corners until my eyes ached. I switched off the recording to save battery, then on again because the silence when it wasn't going felt too blank. Words tried themselves out in my mouth and fell as dead as moths. I know you. Something moved, small, maybe an insect, maybe a trick of blood vessels pulsing in my eye, but then another movement, then a third, like a hand testing the skin of the air, seeing if it would hold weight. I stood up too fast and the room leaned. Stop, I said to nothing. I didn't know what I wanted it to stop doing. Being, remembering, having corners. The knock came again. 3, 2, then 2 more from the opposite corner, as if answering itself. Is that your name? I asked. Stupid. My mouth was a runaway. Knock, knock, knock. My lamp hummed. The plug that should have been snug in the extension cord lay an inch out, as if fingers had pinched and worried it and then let go. I pushed it in. It popped back out with a slow, coy slide. Now my breath had a pattern. 3 short, 2 long. I backed toward the hallway door and touched the chain I had forgotten to latch. The metal was cold. The hallway beyond was darker than it had any right to be with the bulb burning out there. The closest light had died without a sound. The next one flickered like a poor jumper of a heart. Okay, I said, uselessly. My phone buzzed. A notification, recording saved. A thumbnail of the room, a shadow that was not mine. I hit play. The first minute was room noise, the lamp's faint electric whine, the old building's wet lungs. Then there was a new sound, a hush-hush, as if someone were smoothing a dress might never stop wrinkling. It came from the left corner. It moved behind me to the right. It circled me the way you circle a crib. Then a voice, not words, not quite breath, shaped my name without ever delivering it, like the wrong music played by a familiar hand. I jerked the phone away and stopped the recording with a finger that trembled enough to make the screen think I had stroked it. "Enough," I said. "Enough." I looked down and felt the world tilt a degree. The dust on the linoleum carried two sets of footprints. Mine, obvious, and a narrow second set that approached from the left corner to the edge of my mattress and stopped. The toes pointed in, as if the person had kept their heels against the safety of the angle. Children stand that way when they're being scolded. My stomach emptied itself of its warmth, and I had to marshal my muscles in a line, one at a time. Knees, stand. Thighs, hold. Heart, less. "Hello," I said, because I did not know how to be an adult who believed in ghosts, and because the opposite seemed worse. In the right-hand corner, the shadow thickened like cream, a silhouette pulled free of the darkness. Not a monster, not a stranger, me. Not a mirror image. Time had done private work on that face. There was a scar along the jaw I didn't yet have, and the left eye was rimmed in purple oldness. But it was my posture, narrow as apology. My mouth, trying to shape a warning and failing because warnings are always late. I didn't move. I had the feeling if I did, a very old hinge would snap. The other me didn't move either. She trembled with the kind of vibration you only see in live wires and people barely holding themselves away from a scream. She lifted her hand with the slow precision of someone submerged and tapped the air with 2 fingers. 3, then 2. The same old rhythm. Not a name, then. A sequence. A door code. The room brightened slightly as the lamp found itself again. In the honest light, my other me looked worse, like a charcoal copy, like the room had sketched me and smudged the edges with a thumb. I remember a night when I was 8. Dad had yelled. A chair had scooped the air. Mom had told me to stand in the corner until I thought about it. It, a word as big as a wall. I had stood there and watched something in the angle, something that tried very hard to look like my reflection and failed because no reflection should be that close if the mirror isn't there. I did not move then, and the thing I watched whispered to me without a mouth, "Back away." I stepped forward now. The dust recorded it. The shadow of me flinched. The corners didn't love light, but they needed it to define themselves. I picked up the lamp and reached toward the left-hand angle, the one with the scolded child footprints. The air bent around the bulb. Instead of warmth, cold licked my wrist. The light pooled and refused to travel like it was water meeting oil. "Back away," the me thing said, and this time the mouth found the shape of the words. My voice, wrong by an octave, bodying the breath. "You can't stand here." "Why?" I asked. Breathing it made ice sharpen in my throat. "Why can't I?" "Because you already did," she said and lifted her sleeve. On the wrist, 4 pale crescents, claw marks. I had no such scars. Not yet. Memory arrived like a power cut. Everything went black and then too bright. I was 8, tiptoe, the hallway light off against the last promise my mother had just made. In the corner, my own face moved without me. I was going to step into that notch of shadow the way you step off a curb you didn't see. A hand, my hand, shot out of where no hand should be and clamped my wrist and dragged me backward hard enough to make me fall. I had cried and cried, not because it hurt, but because something that looked like me had touched me and left marks, and all anyone could say was, "You must have done that to yourself." I was 32 and my wrist was clean as a promise. But the thing in the corner showed me the scars I would give myself if I wanted to live. "How?" I asked, which is always the wrong question in old buildings. My other me looked at me with the kind of pity you reserve for so close. "This place folds," she said. "Corners stack time. We make ourselves. We warn ourselves. If you don't pull, she won't step back." "She," I repeated, understanding through the floorboards of the word. 8, my other me whispered. "And you're here to close it, or not." The right-hand corner sighed in a way I felt in the joints of my fingers. The air dewed with cold. A smaller shadow bloomed, just at the edge, just an ear and a cheek, and the suggestion of the raw red of a bitten lip. I remembered the lip. I remembered chewing it at the funeral, though I don't remember whose. Anyone could die in Building 17, even a dog, and the building would keep the funeral smell long after the flower water went stale. I set down the lamp and wedged the base tight into the corner as if trying to turn a square into a circle. If I do it, you stay, my other me whispered. You hold the place in line, so it doesn't take her, so it takes you. Outside somewhere, a car alarm started bleeding and the universe felt sudden and stupid. Inside, the generator coughed and the hallway light died. Darkness poured into the apartment with a quiet hurry. The lamp shuddered, swelled, then pinched to a mean filament glow, like a candle pressed under a glass. Or, my other me said, soft as a guilty hand, you changed the shape. Dad's bookcases, the cheap lumber across each corner. He had been building curves, not shelves, dams. I dragged the foam mattress toward the corner and pressed its edge into the angle until the right angle became a fat, obtuse one. I tore the door off a cabinet with panicked strength and shoved it across the other corner. I tied my belt between the lamp and a radiator and hauled it taut so the light skated along the curves I had made and smoothed them, made them breathless and unnatural stripes. The building didn't like it. I could feel the complaint gather, deep, like a train deciding whether to brake. Nails ticked in their wood. A long, long sigh rolled through the wall. The child shape in the right corner faltered. It blurred. It turned its face toward me, but there was nothing there to be seen, just the idea of eyes, which is sometimes worse than actual seeing. Back away, I told it, my voice careful. Please, take one step. Something tugged on my wrist so hard my skin warmed under it. It shocked me, the heat of it after all the cold. My arm jerked forward, but the curve I'd made scooped the movement and softened it. I held on to nothing that felt like rope. From the left corner, the other me made a sound like a choke and set her shoulder against an absence and pushed. The child shape took a step back. A small shoe print blossomed in dust on the floor. My eyes flooded, and I didn't even try to stop it. Good, my other me said, in a voice that had bled backwards through time to become Mom's too-tired whisper. Again. We pulled. The building leaned. The angles fought and resented. Something between the walls clicked like a mouth trying to find a tooth that had been pulled. The lamp flared one last time and then died. That shred of filament glow hung in the dark like a ghost, thinking about a decision. The room was night. For a moment, I was certain of a hand in mine that wasn't mine, and that it belonged to a girl I had been, and a girl I was saving, and a girl who would save me. The hand squeezed the way you squeeze at crosswalks. Then a sound like a very old book closing. Silence, deep, honest. The air warmed along my wrist where an imprint of fingers began to sting. I groped for my phone and turned on its flashlight. A meager cone of light chopped up the room into sections. The left-hand corner was a clumsy bulge of foam and lamp. The right corner was filled by the cabinet door I'd wedged there. The dust at my feet showed only one set of footprints, my own. A second, smaller set, one I had been pretending to see as new, faded as the light smoothed across it and found nothing to catch. Are you, I began, to the left-hand corner, to the shadow of me. Empty. Not empty. The kind of full that only feels like empty because you finally stopped listening for the wrong thing. I raised my phone slowly. The camera made the room into grain and guesses. I found my own face in the screen, pale, threaded with the day. I lifted my left wrist into the light. 4 crescent scars lay pale and ridiculous on my skin. Fresh blood beaded where a thumbnail had bitten too deep. Damn it, I whispered, and laughed the way people laugh when they aren't sure whether solemnity would be worse. I wiped the blood on my jeans, and it made a rusty smudge like a farewell. I packed in a fury that had less to do with fear than with the exhaustion that follows it. There's a kind of sudden hunger you get afterward, like you fought an animal and lost, and also somehow won. I shoved the foam into my bag and left the lamp in the corner, because it felt like it belonged to the building now. At the door, I paused. The hallway was a tunnel with a thinkable end. My breath fogged briefly, and then didn't. I looked back once. The corners were lousy with makeshift curves. The room breathed. A draft found a way to be a good sound for once. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed. The latch didn't catch the first time. The second time it did, with an intimacy that made me want to wash my hands. Downstairs, the caretaker was asleep in his chair, mouth open, a moth flirting with the taste of him. I left the key on the desk, and he startled awake and caught it without looking. His eyes flicked to my wrist, then to the air beside me, then back. "Did you see?" he began, and shut his mouth before the word corners could meet daylight. "No," I said. It was the first lie I've told that felt like a blessing. "But I think I heard the building settle." He nodded. "She does that," he said, and only afterward did I realize he might have meant me, or the girl I had been, or some older building entirely. Outside, the city felt juvenile and loud. The sky had freckles of starlight where it never does. I walked until the queasy distance between then and now snapped and the world returned to its ordinary wrongness. I crawled into my car and put my wrist against the air vent and let the ache talk to me about pattern and payment. At home, I went directly to my bedroom and stared at each corner until morning. Then I went to the hardware store and bought enough quarter-round trim to make the cashier raise his eyebrows. In the afternoon, I cut and sanded and hammered the angles into gentle curves. The room looked strange and then right, and then it looked like a hospital, and then it looked like a church. Places where shape means something. That night, just after 3, I woke to a soft tap. 3, then 2. I sat up and the sound came again, from the kitchen this time. I brought my phone and my breath and my brand new scars, and I stood in my doorway and listened. Knock, knock, knock. Silence. Knock, knock. Something about the sound was off from the building's version. Closer. Warmer. The angle where the refrigerator meets the wall is a mean little place, and I had not yet fixed it. I will. Today. A person should have the right to decide where their doors are. Back away, I breathed, to the kitchen and the past and the future and whatever is stacked in the dark of between. The tap came once more, delicate as a finger on a lip. Then only the ordinary noises, the thrum of a neighbor's life through the wall, the fridge kicking into its slow, faithful work, the narrow sigh of the house cooling into itself. In the morning light, the prints on my wrist were almost pretty. I traced them with a finger and tried to assign them a number or an answer and gave up in favor of coffee. Some nights I wake to the sound again, and some nights I don't. I keep a small lamp on the floor where the wall meets the baseboard. It's silly. It's comforting. It takes the edge off the corner and off me. I don't know if what I pulled out of that room was a child, a memory, or a piece of myself I had mislaid. I don't know if my other me stepped out of the angle and is living somewhere I might cross on the street, or if she found a corner that needed her more. When I pass Building 17 now, there is scaffolding and the particular loud disaster of progress. I tell myself I should look away before the wrecking ball hits. I never do. The first swing lands and the building shudders and the dust goes up like old prayers, and for a second you can see all its rooms at once. The toy lions under the couch, the pen caps that rolled out of reach, the cups on sills with half-moons of sleep adhered to their rims. The corners stay dark, even in that bright surprise of air. Once I thought I saw a figure in 5C, someone standing where the wall and the ceiling agree to meet. A narrow figure, mouth open but not to speak, eyes wide but not to see. I lifted my left hand and the figure lifted its right. We looked like we were waving at each other, or trying to warn, or just agreeing that we existed, in this struck open moment, two versions of a person neither of us were anymore. I put my hand down first. The dust cloud swallowed the view. I went home and finished curving the last mean corner in my kitchen. I turned on the radio. I made the kind of dinner you make when you're trying to prove you are more animal than story. Eggs, toast, fruit in a blue bowl. When I sat to eat, the house breathed around me. Not a sigh, not a warning, the simple huff of something that has shape and chooses to keep it. I ate slowly and did not look at the corners. Later, when the lamp hummed and the refrigerator coughed and the night found its familiar clicks, I heard it again. 3, 2. But it was faint. It was on the other side of some curve I had made. It was a sound that could have been building noise, and for the first time in my life, I let it be exactly that. If the dark in the angles wants to keep a piece of me, it can keep the scars. The rest has work to do. I never planned to chase an urban legend into the belly of a city I barely knew. It started with a DM that slid into my inbox at 3 in the morning, a screenshot of a transit map and a single line of text. "You like the weird stuff, right? Find platform 0. The map looked wrong in a way I couldn't name. A hairline gray as an erasure scar branched off the Nord-Zuid-lane and curled into a pale, unlabeled oval tucked between two legitimate stations. Whoever sent the message included coordinates, a set of stairs behind a maintenance door, and a time when the guards get lazy. There was no profile picture, no handle, just a string of numbers. As I looked again, the oval seemed darker, as if my attention fed it ink. I told myself I wasn't superstitious, only curious. I'd moved here 2 months earlier and had been walking the city at night to soothe the feeling that something had shifted inside me. New streets, new language, new rooms with familiar furniture. Change wakes up the fault lines in a person. Maybe that's why the legend hooked me. It promised a place that also didn't quite fit where it was built. I packed my recorder, a flashlight with fresh batteries, a notebook, a thermos of coffee, and a knife I never admit to carrying. I took the last train downtown and waited for the station to empty. Amsterdam at night is all soft glow and water noise, the city breathing through its bridges. The last drunks laughed their way past the turnstiles. Staff swept the steps. The announcements lapsed into that cushioned silence only huge rooms can make. The maintenance door was exactly where the screenshot said it would be, down a side corridor past a vending machine humming like a wasp nest. A metal door painted the sticky green of hospital walls. The sign read, "Verboden Togang, uitgezonderd personeel." No entry except staff. A keypad blinked a dead red eye. The legend's instructions said, "When the platform powers down, the keypad resets to 000 for 2 minutes. I rolled my eyes at the movie logic and punched 0000. The red eye turned green. The lock thunked open like a surprised throat. The staircase smelled of iron and standing water. My flashlight beam skimmed over concrete rough as a cat's tongue, pipes ratcheting with old cold. The door closed behind me with the polite finality of good manners, and the noise of the city folded up on itself. I started down. Counting steps out loud felt childish, so I counted under my breath and wrote tick marks in my head. The handrail was sticky. My shoulder brushed a spiderweb and brought a cold shiver to my scalp. At step 42, don't ask how I know, it got warmer. The air went from damp to breath temperature, a kind of second skin. I heard something I told myself was water, or a rat, or the building's stale sigh. A soft tuck, tuck, like a coin gently flipped and caught, somewhere below. The stairwell spat me into a corridor barely wider than my shoulders. The walls wore a coat of patchy gray meant for utility rooms, the kind that remembers every handprint forever. To my left, a door tagged UT gang with an arrow that pointed both left and right. I smiled despite myself. Cute. To my right, painted letters so thin they were nearly ghost handwriting. 0. I knew the legend. Everyone hears a version of it. A forgotten platform under a city. A mistake in the blueprints. A place the surveyors swore didn't fit into geometry, so they sealed it and pretended it wasn't there. Sometimes the story says the platform moves between stations like a bubble under wallpaper. Sometimes it says an engineer disappeared counting the steps. If you count them right, the door opens. Sometimes it says the platform remembers each person it takes, and it takes one person for each city map printed with it. I almost turned back. Then my phone buzzed with a new message from the same blank number, a photo of me from behind, halfway down the stairs, my flashlight painting the concrete. The caption, "Nice coat." I spun. The stairwell yawned itself up into darkness. The photograph vanished when I blinked. It had never been saved. I kept going because fear is a fuse. Once it's lit, you can't put it out by standing still. The corridor bent in a slow, patient curve and opened to something too big to be under anything. A platform the size of a basketball court, polished tiles like wet bones, overhead lights in a row of glass coffins humming with that high-frequency note that makes your teeth itch. No tracks. Just a trench that fell away into a black that wasn't shadow but absence. Across the trench, another platform, a twin with a different childhood. The wall behind it was tiled in tiny cream squares. A mosaic spelled out a station name in broken blue letters. I stared until the letters admitted themselves into meaning. Neats. Nothing. I laughed in the way you laugh when you want to cry. I set my recorder on the edge of the trench and hit record. I took out my notebook and wrote, "Platform 0 exists." The nib of my pen resisted the paper like the paper had reasons. For a while I just listened. Big rooms make small sounds important. Drips set a new calendar. My breath sounded practiced. Far away, something metal sighed and settled. I drank coffee, and it tasted like pennies and the way a scarf smells after rain. I walked the length of the platform, running my fingers along the tile, feeling the cool cracks, trying to find the practical truth behind the story. Someone needed a place for overflow. They built it, they lost funding, they sealed it. Cities are full of rooms with no present. The first odd thing was tiny. The vending machine near the corridor, a twin of the one upstairs, had power despite the station being shut. Inside, rows of snacks sat in metal spirals, backlit with a weary light. I pressed my face to the glass. The expiration dates were crisp and new. Next month, the month after. My reflection pressed its face to me. I smiled, and my reflection hesitated, then caught up, like a signal bouncing off weather. I wiped the glass with my sleeve. A fingerprint smudged a circle in the condensation. Not mine. I could see the whorl. The pattern looked eerily familiar, then wrong. A loop where I knew there should be an arch. Memory stuttered like a scratched disc. The second odd thing, a poster on the wall I could swear had been blank when I came in, now showed a map. It looked like the screenshot I'd been sent. The pale oval was bolder now, labeled 0, neats, in block letters. Beneath, a slogan, "Waar je niet bent, ben je het meest jezelf." Where you are not, you are most yourself. The Dutch was fine, but the meaning wobbled like heat over tarmac. I turned off my flashlight to see how dark the dark was. The overhead lights gave just enough pale for shapes to have opinions. I stood in that humming whiteness and waited for my eyes to lie to me. The trench waited like a mouth. That's when I heard it again. Tuck, tuck. I followed the sound to the far end of the platform where the tiles met an unpainted concrete wall. The sound came from the other side, a little to my left. I pressed my ear to the wall. The concrete was warmer than my skin. "Hello," I said, because I'm stupid. The recorder's tiny red eye watched me like a patient animal. 2. Tuck, not a coin. Something else. Fingers, maybe? Tapping in a pattern, a rhythm almost like counting. 2 taps, pause, 1 tap, pause, 3. The sequence from middle school swam up from the fish tank of memory. Fibonacci. I had the sudden childish fantasy that if I tapped back, I'd complete something the station had been waiting years to hear. I raised my knuckles to the wall and stopped. My flashlight rolled. A soft clink as it turned, beam swinging in a slow circle. I hadn't touched it. The beam found my recorder, then slid along the platform edge, then caught on a pair of shoes at the platform's center. Black sneakers with white rubber toes. My shoes. I was wearing mine. The pair in the light were scuffed where mine weren't, laces tied in the lazy double knot I'd used before I started looping them clean to keep them tidy. They were pointed at me, spaced like someone standing casually. I reached the beam with my hand. There was nothing there. The shoes were there, and then they weren't. The light made the tile wink and showed me only my own breath coming in little clouds like I was pretending it was winter. I turned the light back on fully and did the thing I always make fun of in movies. "Who's there?" The air tasted like a penny under the tongue, a metallic sour that made my molars ache. No answer, except the announcement system clearing its throat. The speakers crackled. A friendly synthetic voice chimed in the bland tone meant to carry orders without insulting anyone. "Perron 0, volgende vertrek, nooit. Platform 0, next departure, never." The word nooit echoed more than it should have, as if the room had miscalculated how many surfaces it owned. When the echo finished, I heard my own voice answer in a whisper not my own, "Never." It came from the other platform, across the trench. I swung the beam and saw myself standing there. My coat, my hat, even the small paint fleck on the brim from moving day. Same recorder hanging around my neck, the wire coiled like a pet sleeping. I lifted my hand. The person across didn't. They tilted their head the way I do when I'm deciding whether to leave. The face was mine, but the eyes were a shade too light, as if the iris had been rinsed with milk. "Hey," I said to me. "Hey," me said to I, half a beat too late. There are kinds of fear you feel only when you meet a version of yourself you wouldn't choose to be. My knees weakened. I told myself it was a mirror, but my reflection was breathing on its own rhythm, not catching up, not catching up. I hated that I waved. The other me smiled, a fractional copy of my smile, like it had been assembled from a description. They knelt until their face was a blur just above the trench. I did not move. They lifted their recorder and pressed play. My voice came out of their speaker. I never planned to chase an urban legend. I was listening to my own night, a loop that had begun while I was still inside it. A moist, hungry sound crept up behind my words, the sound of pages turning fast. The other me cocked their head, as if checking the levels on my life. The polite voice glided through the speakers again. Para null, mind the gap. Across from me, the not I touched their fingers to their forehead. The gesture looked rehearsed in a mirror and performed without one. What are you? I asked the platform, the trench, the city, myself. The other me pressed a finger to their lips, a playhouse shh. Then they pointed behind me. I didn't want to look. The air behind my neck ruffled as if someone exhaled. I turned. The map poster now listed a timetable. Under arrivals, the blank had filled with strings of numbers and gentle, imprecise words. 0113, you, a man with blue hands, she who hears whispers. Under departures, only one line, repeating, a name you can live without. The hunger behind the speaker sound was closer. I realized it was my notebook. I flipped it open. The page where I'd written Platform 0 exists now contained more. A paragraph in my handwriting that I hadn't written yet, describing the second me, the shoes, the timetable. I watched a sentence write itself. Under departures, the price is always memory. The letters formed in my pen stroke stiffness, the way I cross my T, the way I loop my G when I'm tired. I threw the notebook. It slid across the tile and stopped right at the platform edge. Across from me, not me smiled again, wider, revealing gums that were too pale. They held up their notebook. I saw my handwriting in it too, except the last line was different. Under departures, the price is always someone else's. The station didn't want my body. It wanted to be believed. It wanted maps and mouth-to-ear stories and DMs at 3 a.m. It wanted to be printed on brochures and whispered to new arrivals who felt like badly fitted furniture. It wanted a space in the part of the city that lives behind your eyelids when you try to sleep, and for that space, it would trade. Not blood, not the old myth currency, memory, a name I could live without. My phone vibrated, a new message from the number that had summoned me. But now the blank handle had split into letters, rearranging themselves like subway tiles until they spelled my name. The message read, "Choose a door. Someone has to forget." The turnstiles at the back of the platform slid open with a sigh I felt in my ribs. 2 doors waited there now, one labeled UI Gong and one labeled 0. The exit door pulsed with a heat like a hand. The 0 door leached warmth out of the air. "Which one takes me home?" I said. The other me didn't answer. They leaned forward so that, for a blink, their face hovered in the middle of the gap like a wrong moon, lit from below. They mouthed the words slowly so I'd see every shape. Both. The announcement system whispered, "Mind the gap between who you are and who the city thinks you are." I was shaking. I did the only stubborn thing left to me. I picked up my recorder, jammed it into my pocket, and walked to the doors. Up close, the labels were flakes. Beneath UI Gang I could see another word, scraped away, Ruil. Trade. Beneath 0, a smear of letters like a prayer smudged by tears. I pressed my palm to UIT Gang. Heat. I smelled coffee like the cup I'd left on my kitchen counter the first day I moved in, when I'd set it down and couldn't find it for an hour because the kitchen didn't yet know my habits. I thought about the price, a name I could live without. I inventoried my people. The list formed in my head and fought me, slippery as fish. To the station, without meant you'll still stand up and breathe and make toast. It didn't mean without pain. I pressed my palm to 0, cold. And beneath the cold, a relief like lying down in a story you haven't heard the ending of. The station would keep me and let me wander its throat forever, hearing everyone else's stories, becoming part of the legend that had pulled me here. I saw myself in a month, a year, a decade, a rumor with my coat, a whisper with my voice, a pair of shoes that insisted on existing where nothing stood. No more choices, no more belonging badly. The temptation made my knees nearly unlock. Behind me, not me, coughed. a polite sound like someone requesting the salt. "If you leave," they said in my voice, "you'll tell it. You won't mean to. You'll write this down and people will read it and they'll look for the door. One by one." I turned. "Is that what you want?" They shrugged. I recognized the shrug. The legend wants to be real and can only be real inside you, and me, and them. They dipped their head toward the blankness where the tracks should be. It wants population. Their eyes were so pale now I could see the small spokes in the iris, the little wheel that turns a person's gaze into a machine. "How much did you pay to leave?" I asked. They put a finger against their chest. "Enough to talk like you." They smiled, and this time I saw it. The teeth weren't wrong. They were mine, but organized in a slightly different plan, the blueprint of a body negotiated by a committee that hadn't met me. The tuck-tuck-tuck came again from beyond the concrete. The Fibonacci pattern reached the part where the numbers leaped from 3 to 5 to 8, and the tapping hurried, eager to grow. The station leaned, a building-sized listening. I chose the door that said exit. I am not a martyr. Before I could think better, I pressed the latch and stepped through. It was like walking from a winter swimming hole into a sauna, except the heat was memory. Every dinner table laid with a different childhood song. Every pair of hands I've held, every name I've whispered in the dark. The door shut with surgical care. The corridor behind it knew the smell of bleach and train brake dust. I ran. I counted the steps on the way up, 42, 43, 44, and lost count because the numbers wouldn't hold their shape. My legs burned. I burst through the maintenance door into the station's blue-white morning. A janitor looked up from the terrazzo. He stared like I'd come through a wall instead of a door. Maybe I had. I wanted to explain in practiced Dutch, to say I got lost, to say the schedule changed, to say there's a mistake. When I opened my mouth, a name fell out and shattered on the floor like a dropped cup. I bent to pick it up and found my hands empty. I stumbled home. The city was brighter than it should be, as if the sun had been polished or the canals had been scrubbed with chalk. When I turned the key in my apartment, it hesitated before accepting me. The hallway had swallowed another centimeter. The light switch sat half a hand span left of where it had slept last night. On my kitchen counter sat a coffee cup with a ring around it like a little tide mark. The cup was chipped. I didn't own a chipped cup. I did now. It had always been chipped. I checked my phone. My contacts list had a gap shaped like a tooth missing from a smile. There's a feeling you get looking at an empty shelf that used to hold a book. The shadow of the book remains. My body knew someone belonged there. My mind didn't. The station had been kind. It had taken a name I loved in a way that would not ruin me, but would bruise everything around the shape of it. Photographs contained an extra elbow in a shared dinner shot, a seat turned toward a joke I can almost hear. My notebooks had empty parentheses like a hug with nobody inside. In my voice recorder, the night played back in a rush. It sounds staged until the moment the other me speaks. Then it sounds like grief. I told myself I could keep the legend in a box. Don't talk about it. Don't write about it. But stories are impatient. They want to live in mouths. I found myself making coffee on a Saturday and writing down the details without planning to. The vending machine that remembered the future, the platform labeled nothing, the timetable offering trades. My pen moved like a divining rod. I tore out the page and burned it in the sink. The ash smelled like old rails. That afternoon, while the city breathed its weekend breath and a barge shouldered along the canal, my phone buzzed. A DM from a number I know is mine and isn't. A screenshot of a map, a pale oval bolding itself by looking. "You like the weird stuff, right?" it said. "Find platform 0. I stared at the message and felt the door latches inside me shift. I thought of the name I'd traded. I thought of the other me and the way their eyes had turned into instruments. I thought of the way the station had said never like a promise and a threat. And I understood something I don't want to understand. It wasn't the platform that hunted, it was the legend. The story needs a teller every time it spreads to a new mind. And it keeps you loyal by taking a piece of you you can't use to fight it, by removing the name that would pull you back when you turn to walk away. Without that name, you're a little lighter, easier to lift, easier to carry into someone else's night. So I'm writing this with the recorder off and my phone wrapped in foil. the windows open so the city's noise can keep me honest. I'm writing it because a part of me wants to warn you, and another part knows warning is an advertisement with different clothes. I'm writing it because I can't stop tracing the faint oval on the transit map until it darkens under my finger. I'm writing it because I woke up this morning and found a pair of shoes by the door, scuffed where mine aren't, laced the old way, pointed toward the hall. If you go looking for Platform 0, you may find nothing. You may find a door that doesn't open or a staircase that ends at a padlock painted shut. You may laugh and go home and forget this completely. I hope you do. But if you hear a soft tuck-tuck through a wall that's warmer than your skin, if a vending machine shows you snacks that haven't been made yet, if a map adds an oval while you're staring, if you catch yourself finishing your own sentences a fraction too late, stop, count your steps, count your names, hold them hard. Because when the station asks you what you'll trade to leave, it will mean it. And if you can think of a name you can live without, the legend has already put its hand on your shoulder. Tonight, when I brush my teeth, the mirror lags and catches up. Somewhere between Mind the Gap and Uitgang, there's a version of me still walking. If you feel an extra step under your feet on the stairs, like the building keeps one more than it needs, don't worry, it's probably nothing. Probably. I'm writing this because the calls haven't stopped, and because I need someone else to know they're not just numbers on a screen or pranks from bored kids. They're invitations, hooks. If you answer, something answers back. I didn't believe that either until I took the house-sitting job at the old field office by the marsh and listened to the phone ring even after I tore it out of the wall. The place had been a ranger station once. Long before smartphones, hikers would duck in to report trail conditions, and tourists would ask about the best time to hear the loons. There's still a hand-painted sign nailed to a birch trunk by the road. Information, call inside. The paint has bled into the grain in a way that makes each letter look wet. The county converted the station to a research outpost and let it fall into a kind of ritual maintenance. New shingles when the roof screamed for them, a fresh fire extinguisher inspected by someone who never stepped inside. It was cheap, isolated, and came with a stipend. My only job for a week was to babysit the empty rooms, keep the lights on, and answer any winter stragglers who might wander in. The marsh was a palette of pewter water and stiff, blade-flat grass. The building itself was one story, but felt tall because of the pitched roof and the way the windows craned high up to catch the last light. Inside, the air held the smell of varnish and cleaning fluid, the recent, sharp kind that masks older scents. Mouse nest, damp paper, sun-warmed dust. There were 4 rooms, the front office with a desk and a landline phone the color of bone, a side room with a cot and a metal wardrobe for whoever was stationed overnight, a small kitchen where the refrigerator hummed in a key that made my teeth ache, and a storage room at the back that was locked, its door painted over so many times the knob had a lip. The first odd thing was not the sound, it was the quiet. Marshes have their own orchestral life. Even in winter you hear brittle wing beats, ice shifting against reeds, a fox stepping where it trusts its weight. But as I set my bag down and tested the kitchen tap, as I opened the wardrobe and found old uniforms folded with military square corners, as I read the laminated binder of duties, the quiet seemed to come closer and settle into the crooks of the rooms. My footsteps rang too long, and the ceiling fan balefully ticked though it wasn't on. The binder had a note on the first page, written in careful block print and slipped under the plastic sleeve. Answer if they ask for help. Beneath it, smaller, but don't say hello. I laughed when I read it because it felt like a ranger's old superstition or an inside joke, the way firefighters nail a boot to the ceiling for luck. The landline sat on the desk with its coiled cord and grayish buttons. The number was taped to the base, a local area code I didn't recognize. Some leftover instinct made me pick up the receiver and listen, as if a dial tone would tell me something about the building's health. The tone was steady and low, like the inside of a seashell held to the ear. I unpacked. I made tea. The kettle screamed like a swing set, then sighed into silence after I pulled it off the burner. I ate a sandwich standing in the kitchen because sitting felt too settled. Night comes early out there. From the front windows, the marsh went from metal to glass to black felt, swallowing even the reflection of the sky. I clicked on the fluorescent light in the office, and it shuddered once, then held. A fine, powdery dust rose from the cord when I plugged in my laptop, and my fingertips came away gray. I was rereading the note about not saying hello when the phone rang. No one uses landlines anymore, so there's a peculiar air of ceremony when one does ring, like a clock chiming in a church. It startled me hard enough that the tea sloshed onto my wrist. The sound was old-fashioned, too, not electronic bleeps, but a bell inside a tin can. I let it ring twice, because that's what you do in movies. Then I picked up. I didn't say hello. The note had lodged in the back of my throat. For a moment there was only that seashell tone, but softer, as if I were now inside the shell. Then I heard wind. Not the wind around the station, which I knew by then had a particular whistle through the soffits, but an open horizontal sound like a field opening its ribs. Voices moved under it. Not speaking, but carrying words the way a river carries leaves. "Do you hear me?" said a voice I could barely call a voice because it seemed assembled from distances. A woman's, maybe. Maybe a man's pitched upward. "Do you hear me?" it repeated, but staggered, the second time landing closer to the tone of my own breath. I waited. My tongue felt too big in my mouth. "Help," the voice added. That word was clear as a bell. I swallowed. "Where are you?" I said before I could stop myself. There was a quick, rattling inhale, as if the person on the other end hadn't expected me to answer. Then the line went flat again. I stood there holding the receiver to my ear until the fan ticked again and the hum of the refrigerator slid back into notice. When I finally put the phone down, the room felt a degree colder. You don't want to be gullible when you're alone. The mind is a theater with unlimited budget. You can stage anything if you light it right. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe there was a shed somewhere with a bored teenager who knew the number on the base. I ran hot water over my wrist to chase the tea sting away and watched my skin pink under the stream. The second call came at 2:17 in the morning. I know because the old digital clock by the cot only worked when the room temperature fell below 58 degrees, and at 2:17 the heat had let up just enough for the numbers to fossilize back into place. I woke with my heart already pounding, already the length of the building in my mind, moving from cot to phone, from silence to ring. 2 rings, then I lifted. The tone rose from the other end like breath put to glass. "Don't say hello," I blurted, half asleep, half joking, and heard myself echo, stilted. "Don't say hello." Not through the room, not from the corner where nightmares perch during travel sleeps and watch you breathe, but through the line. A second later, I said it again, only this time it wasn't me who spoke first. I pressed the receiver harder to my ear. The plastic squeaked. "Am I late?" the voice asked. "For what?" I said. My mouth had gone dry. "Who is this?" There was a sound I recognized now, paper sliding under a door in another room, except the room is behind your eyes. Then, "You're late." The voice's edges sharpened. The words found bones. "You're late, you're late, you're late." I hung up. The ring stopped. My hand shook enough that the receiver clattered as it found its cradle, and the sound was grotesquely loud at that hour. I sat on the edge of the cot, the old blanket scratching my calves, and dialed my cell out of reflex. No bars, of course. Even if there had been, who would I call? What would I say? I considered leaving right then. The thought of the road in the dark was worse than the absurdity of a talking phone. I did not sleep. Light leaks into night differently in isolated places. It comes thin, like spilled milk wiped up and left damp. By the time the window glass was the color of the inside of a pearl, I had convinced myself I'd imagined enough of it to make the rest trivial. I made coffee. I found a jar of instant oats in the cupboard and ate them with a plastic spoon someone had washed and saved. The phone sat like a patient animal watching the door. Day softened the station. Dust looked like snow in the slant from the eastern windows. I explored. The locked storage room at the back had a mail slot cut into its door. When I knelt and peered through, I saw only the flat dark of a shelf very close to the other side. Beside the door was a metal panel with gray dials and a label that said switchboard, a relic from a time when the station had lines that branched to other buildings on the trail. A forest of wires ran up through the ceiling from the panel, bundled in a way that made the bundle look like something once alive, now bound like a cut ponytail. I touched it and felt cold through the rubber. The panel was bolted shut. There were logbooks in the desk drawer, the kind rangers keep because details keep the world from fraying: date, temperature, visitors, notes. The December entries were sparse. Snow squalls. One couple from Pittsburgh. Child with purple mittens lost a hat, returned. 3 weeks ago, the last page, a different hand. 217 again, it read. Then, answer if they ask for help. On the next line, smaller, but don't say hello. I didn't answer the phone that afternoon when it rang. It rang once at noon, politely. Once at 12:03, more insistent. At 12:20, 3 times in a row, then a gap, then 4. I watched it from the kitchen doorway and counted the spaces between rings the way you count lightning. On the 5th attempt, a sad thought snuck in. What if someone out on the marsh was hurt? What if their only lifeline was the number nailed to the birch trunk, and the idiot inside was letting it ring? The sound was not electronic anymore. It was a beckon, and the room vibrated with it. I picked up the receiver and didn't say anything. The breath behind glass tone rose beneath my ear. A long time passed in which neither of us spoke, though I could feel the other presence gather itself. Then, honey, said my mother's voice. I forgot the note. I forgot the logbook handwriting and the way it had etched itself across my eyelids when I tried to blink. The sound of my mother, the way she sounded when she called me at college from the kitchen, wet hands searching for a towel, made something in me open like a trapdoor. Mom? I said so hard that the word cracked. I can't find your jacket, her voice said. There was the clack of plates, the whir of a stove fan. It's cold out. You should take my scarf. She had never had that stove. Those plates, a dry stoneware clatter, were the ones we'd had before the divorce when I was 8. She had been dead for 2 winters. Where are you? I said. Away, she said, and her voice fell through itself, as if she'd stepped into a stairwell, and for a second the line showed me not a person but a place. A hallway with walls the color of unripe pears, a second phone hanging with its cord looped like an umbilical, a window reflected in glass. I hung up so hard my knuckles smarted. I pressed both hands to the desk. The wood felt warm. The phone sat between my palms like a heartbeat. From then on, I understand how a thing you fear can become a clock you set your life by. You begin waiting before you notice you're waiting. I walked the edge of the marsh in the afternoon and listened to the cattails clack like dice. I cooked soup from a can. I tried to read. When full dark came, the station and I suspended ourselves between rings, ear to the world, mouth to the line. At 2:17 it rang again, 4 times before I picked up. I drank air and tried to feed it to my blood. Silence on the other end, except it wasn't silence. It was sound with its teeth pulled. A house holds on to what's been said in it, and if you are quiet enough, you can sometimes hear the old words unstitch and fall. Out of that softened fabric came my own voice. Where are you? I heard myself ask. The self-reproach in it, the way I lifted the tail on R, was exactly me. It made my scalp tighten. Then overlapping, like a misaligned tape, don't say hello. I should have thrown the phone into the marsh. I should have packed a bag and walked until my feet blistered. I should have done anything except what I did. I went to the back room and rattled the locked door. What's in here? I asked the wood, which is to say I asked myself. The switchboard panel looked back at me with no eyes. The screws in the corners were flathead and had been painted same as the wall, but paint flakes when it's tired. I found a butter knife in the kitchen and a screwdriver in the desk. Hunched on my knees, sweating despite the cold, I chipped paint until the slots appeared, and then I turned. The 2 top screws came loose as if relieved to be touched. The bottom 2 fought me like teeth. When the panel finally swung, I staggered back. I'd imagined a neat nest of lines. What filled the shallow pocket was more like hair, matted, but hair that glittered. Copper wires, dozens, hundreds, some as fine as a seamstress's thread, some as thick as veins, ran into the hollow space and were soldered in loops on a metal plate. They pulsed very slowly, as if cooling or thinking. Embedded between the loops, like fossils, were little discs of grayish plastic with 4 holes each. Phone jacks, the old kind used by human operators. They looked like eyes with 4 pupils. One of the jacks had a short, frayed cord stuck in it, as if a plug had once lived there and been yanked. The frayed end quivered. When the phone rang again, the sound came not only from the desk but from the panel, high and thin and multiplied, like a chorus of hens. I tipped the panel on its hinges and it clanged against the painted wall. The sound vibrated tiny chips of whatever was trapped back into the air. Without letting myself think, I went to the desk, lifted the receiver, and this time I spoke first. "I hear you," I said. "What do you want?" My voice answered slightly behind me from the panel. "I hear you. What do you want?" "No," I said into the phone. "No," said the phone. "Stop," I said. "Stop," said a dozen mouths. Then underneath my voice, braided through it like a splice, the other voice rose. "Thank you," it said. "Now I can come through." I slammed the receiver toward its cradle. Before it landed, I reached down and ripped the cord free. The plastic casing spit staples of wire, and the cord whipped like a severed tail. The ringing didn't stop. It climbed the walls and shivered the glasses in the kitchen. The marsh took it and returned it, like an animal calling back to see. There's a feedback loop you can make, an ugly, shrieking thing, if you hold a speaker to the microphone that feeds it. I only knew this because my father used to make noise for a living, and one summer he showed me how to build a loop with a guitar amp and the shore's wind. You connect sound to itself, and the world says no in a way that rattles your bones. I grabbed the receiver and the bass and pressed them together, hard, until the line howled. The howl flooded the panel, rattled the copper, made dust stream out like breath. The howl seemed to give the room a shape it had not had, as if by filling the air with refusal I could outline the thing pressing against it. I felt it, then, broad as a doorway, neither cold nor hot, but the opposite of both. Pushing. It had no face but a face pushed back, trying to find the mouth it could fit through. It didn't like the loop. The ringing fractured, went sideways, landed in the refrigerator's hum. The fridge whined and then died with a clunk. The ceiling fan spun once with no electricity and hung there like a thrown coin. I kept the receiver kissing the base until my arms shook. The howl joined me to the building and to whatever leaned on its other side. I think I shouted, but I couldn't hear myself under the animal of it. The howl broke before I did. It cracked into 3 pieces and curled out of the room like smoke. The wires calmed. The copper settled. Something withdrew the way a tide does, off the sand, off the buried rocks, off the ripples it had carved around my ankles. I stood there, bent, my forehead pressed to the desk, and breathed. When the silence came back, it came wrong. The refrigerator was dead, so that hum was gone. The ceiling fan was a motionless frown. The marsh had lost its toothy wind. In their place were the sounds I thought I'd silenced, the loops of my own voice on thin, invisible tracks, unwinding. "Don't say hello," said the kitchen doorway. "Where are you?" asked the cot. "Honey?" said the scuffed plank floor, so tender I nearly stepped on the word. I snatched the cord from the wall, stripped it to show 2 veins of copper, and tied them together in a knot I learned in Girl Scouts, the kind you use when a lash has to hold in a storm. I threw the base into the storage room panel and shoved the panel shut with my shoulder. The screws clattered to the floor. I dragged the metal wardrobe in front of the door as if barricading a flood. The night after that was long. I slept in minutes. I dreamed in seconds. My mouth tasted like pennies. In the morning, the dead refrigerator had sweated itself into a puddle. I wrote 217 again in the logbook, and, underneath in smaller letters, "If you're reading this, leave." Then, because I was still me and still believed in instructions, I wrote, "Answer if they ask for help." I left before noon. I left the panel shut and the wardrobe against it, and the landline coiled like a snake under the desk. The birch sign by the road was as wet-looking as ever. The marsh rolled its shoulder and made no promises. When I hit the blacktop, I started to cry. You think relief will be a golden wash. It wasn't. It was like dropping a weight you didn't know you held and feeling your arms fly up without you. The first call followed me home 2 nights later. Different phone. My own number on my own couch in the city, with traffic sifting through slate-colored rain outside. Unknown caller, the screen said, as if anonymity were polite. The ring was my ring. I didn't answer. I put the phone face down and watched it charge itself with light. After the 3rd call, I turned the phone off. After the fourth, I put it in the refrigerator, even though that's not how anything works, and the sound came through the door anyway. Muffled and insistent, like a hand knocking under ice. I changed my number. I threw the SIM card into a storm drain. Friends texted me exasperated, then concerned, then less frequently. My boss asked if I needed time off. I said yes. He said, "We'll talk Monday," which is a very Carven phrase. Now the calls come through things. Sometimes the radiator ticks 13 times and then pauses and then ticks 4 more. And I know if I counted in a different bass it would spell my name. Sometimes the kettle screams and holds an odd note at the top, and the odd note is my mother's "honey" stretched to the length of a breath. In grocery stores, the self-checkout stations bleat and I feel my mouth shape hello and clamp it shut. There are good hours. In the mornings when the traffic is full and real, when old men argue in the park and pigeons hunch like prematurely dressed men in shoulders of gray. I walk. I don't take calls. I learned to never put anything with a speaker directly near anything with a microphone. I turned my TV into a storage table. I tell myself that I'm safer among people, because if the thing is listening, it will be distracted by all the other voices, all the other loops. But sometimes, late, I pour water into a glass and the ripple against the rim shocks, as if something has knocked from the other side. Sometimes my apartment goes quiet in that Marsh office way, and the room becomes a receiver, and my own lungs being forced to make sound is the only thing that keeps it from picking up. If you're reading this because you took a job or found a note or listened in a room that remembers too much, here's what I know. The true threat wasn't a prankster on the line or a ghost with a number. It wasn't even the voice that sounded like my mother, though it knew why that would hurt me. It was something that gathers attention to itself through every path we've built for it. A switchboard of us, the copper in the walls and the bright ropes under the streets, and the small, invisible wires inside us that quiver when we hear our own name said the way we say it. It wants you to open a mouth that matches its shape. It will wear your voice back to you until it fits. Don't say hello. If they ask for help, answer. But don't answer with your name or the word you use for yourself when you mean it. Ask where they are. Ask what it looks like. Ask them to describe the room before you step into it. Make a loop if you have to. Make the world say no until the thing runs. And if your phone rings when it shouldn't, if the radiator ticks like a clock it never was, if the kettle cries in your mother's pitch, if the marsh whistles your old address through a slit of reed, don't panic. Breathe. Wait for 217 to become 218. You'll know the difference. The room will soften and your voice will come back into your chest like a bird that knows its window. When that happens, step away from the receiver. Step outside into traffic and people and the machinery of ordinary days. Let the wires in the ground carry a million other words. Let your mouth be quiet until your mouth is yours. The phone on my table is off. It's been off for an hour and for a week and for a month. I can still hear it sometimes, ticking like a mechanical heart. Tonight it will ring at 2:17. I won't answer. In the small window over my sink, the city's lights make a constellation that doesn't show up in any sky anyone drew. The kettle breathes. The radiator rests. The hum in the wall is only a hum. But even as I write that, my fingers shake. The line tightens. I listen and promise myself that if anyone says help, I will answer and open the door, and I will not say hello. And if my mother speaks again, wet hands searching for a towel, I will tell her the jacket is by the door, and that the scarf is in the drawer under the phone, and that it is so very cold out. I will tell her everything I have learned. I will tell her to hang up. I will tell her that sometimes the only way to live is to refuse the invitation, even when it calls you by name. I took the night shift at the municipal archives because I wanted the quiet. They'd converted the old Hillcrest Sanatorium into a climate-controlled repository. 12 floors of sealed rooms and rolling shelves, the scent of desiccated glue and lignin carried on a recycled, chemically scrubbed breeze. The pay wasn't much, but the work had a fixed shape. Scan accession logs, label boxes, shuttle a cart or two down the aisles, and above all, do not eat or drink near the materials. There was a single break room with a microwave that bleated in a tired tone, and a window that looked out over the parking lot and the black fringe of a cemetery. It should have been peaceful. I brought a thermos of coffee in a sealed bottle, a pen I was absolutely not going to use near collections, and a paperback I'd picked up that morning from a thrift store on the walk to the bus. The cover had no title, just a field of gray with blind embossed lines like staples. Inside, careful typewriter text with diagrams of nested squares. Someone had rubber-stamped the first page. Manual of Inductions. I'd laugh about it later, I told myself. The eccentric occult book in the archival basement. I put it on the corner of the workstation, away from the barcode scanner and the rolling shelves, a little private joke to puncture the sterile seriousness. By midnight, I had finished 3 carts. Fluorescents hummed overhead, steady and judgmental. The dehumidifiers cycled every 20 minutes. The sound came like a slow inhale, then a long white exhale into the ducts. If I had been paying attention, I might have noticed I was breathing with it. The sub-basement held the film reels. Their metal canisters held the cold like coins. Each aisle was a narrow throat edged with gray steel. When I stopped the rolling shelves to step between them, their gears settled with a soft chime and click, like a clock locking its hands in place. I'd coasted my cart into aisle B12 for a run of county ledgers from 1911. Names marched in tidy columns in a clerk's neat hand. I cataloged, printed my labels, slid the ledgers back and turned, and something passed across the end of the aisle. Not light, a draft. The sense of someone walking by and glancing in. "Hello," I called, soft so as not to break the hour. My voice went flat against the close metal. No reply. Only that cycling inhale in the vents. I returned to the workstation. The printed labels lay in a drift where I'd left them, except they weren't straight. They'd migrated a fraction of an inch, edges aligned not with the cutting grid, but with the top edge of the table. I didn't remember knocking them. Another cart, another aisle. A hiss like a nail scraping cardboard came from somewhere behind my back, sharp enough to gooseflesh my arms. When I looked, nothing had shifted. I worked faster. The sound came again, faint, repetitive. Scrape, scrape. I set the ledger down too hard. The spine thumped. Dust breathed out. "Rodents," I said to claim it. "Pipes." The building settling around me like an old coat. Between aisles, between shelves, the margins of rooms. It was an old building. Old dust had its own voice. At 113, because I looked at the monitor and fixed the numbers in my head, as if the minute could anchor me, I gave up on being a machine and went to the break room. The microwave's bleat sounded too loud. The window was only a black mirror reflecting me and the gently bobbing chain of the overhead light. I unscrewed my thermos, let the coffee steam up, and tried not to think about breathing in time with the nearest machine, as if the building and I were sharing lungs. When I came back, the paperback had shifted. Not much. A fingertip's breadth. The manual lay not square to the table edge, but fractionally angled, its lower right corner pointing at me, so the blind embossed lines of the cover caught the light. I stopped just short of laughing and told myself that nothing is stable on laminate, that polished surfaces have their own microclimates, that my elbow had brushed it on the way out. I opened it, because if you declare a thing ridiculous, you are obligated to prove it. The pages smelled faintly of starch, and below it, something else. Ozone, maybe, the scent of a photocopier after a long run. The diagrams of squares weren't diagrams, but layouts. Columns, gutters, rules. Paragraphs were numbered like steps. The chapter I fell into was titled "A Spoken Gate for the Unseen Auditor." There was a warning beneath in small type. Readers are advised to maintain their distance from reflective surfaces. Do not read aloud. Mark your pauses. The text after that was more precise, more technical than any witchy sloganeering. It was typography wearing ritual like a borrowed coat. Inhale on commas, exhale on line breaks. It was instructions for breath. It made me smile, and then, before I could edit the impulse, I breathed with the sentence, drawing in when I came to a comma, letting it go when the line ended. The room seemed to hold a fraction more weight when I did it, as if each pause nudged some invisible pendulum. It felt foolish, so I did it again, because that's what we do when something feels foolish yet plausible. We do it twice to prove we're not nervous. The dehumidifier kicked in. The vents sighed, and in that sigh I heard, or produced, a quiet reply, a whisper that was only my breath reflected back. The instructions said, "Do not read aloud," and I wasn't. The words were in my head, but the rhythm was in the room. A shadow passed the far door's little wired glass window. I saw it only as a deepening of gray. When I looked, it was my own head reflected in miniature, a blunted shape, a dot, too small, as if the silhouette belonged to a taller person standing in a different corridor. When I moved, my dot moved. The other didn't. "Hey," I said, again with that laugh, again not really meaning it. "I didn't hear you come down." Nothing. In the heavy quiet, a soft sound like two paper edges slipping past one another. It could have been the building's lungs and mine sinking for a second, that's all. A coincidence of machinery and body. I could have stopped reading then, put the book face down, pushed my chair back so it screeched and put a scuff in the night. Instead, I traced the blind embossed lines on the cover with an idle finger and returned to the next numbered paragraph. "Close your lips at every period so the room does not drink you." I don't think I smiled that time. Another aisle, another cart, the click chime of gears, the hiss of conditioned air, the little nail-on cardboard scrape followed, a little closer. When I slotted a ledger back and hit the brake, the shelf stuttered as if nudged from the other side, and a box thumped the floor in a muffled spill. The silence afterward ballooned around me, fat and expectant. I swore, softly, and crouched. It was a box of photographs, silver gelatin prints in individual sleeves, a woman in a fur-collared coat, eyes averted, a typical early 80s Christmas, tinsel and a TV with wood veneer, a row of first graders with their coats hung on pegs behind them, their names lettered with a teacher's steady hand. I glanced at the label. Civic, unclaimed 1979 to 1991. The backs of the photos had pencil notes, probably West Side. Fine negatives? Unknown. The edges of the prints were cool and slick. When I slid one back into its sleeve, the polyethylene whispered. I found I was careful with my breath. The whisper in the vents turned a shade darker. It wasn't a sound like a voice so much as a subtraction, a dip in the rush of air as if something stood in it and made a hollow. The hollow arrived by degrees until my skin goose-prickled from my wrists to the back of my neck, the way you feel when someone stands behind you and studies the bend of your ear. I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself it was late. I told myself it was my thermos coffee and too much fluorescent light. I told myself a great many things, repeating them in an orderly sequence as if I could staple the night to a clipboard. I put the photographs back in their box and wrote the accession code in neat black letters and slid the box home. When I stepped out into the corridor, the elevator doors opened without a call. The cage was empty, lit in greenish light. The floor indicator wavered, then settled on 1. We did not have a negative floor. The doors waited, patient and hollow. "No," I said, "not tonight." I pushed the button to close. The doors obeyed. I breathed and felt the sentence land. "Close your lips at every period so the room does not drink you." I went back to the workstation. The manual lay open to the next page. I hadn't left it open. The paper clip on the top corner was bent into the shape of a small arrow pointing to a line in the text. "You will be tempted to leave the frame of the room. This is the audit inviting you into the register. Decline." When I touch that part of the page now in my memory, my finger is cold. I turned the page down, not quite a dog ear, just enough to cover those instructions, and stood up too quickly. My chair shot backward and bumped the wall. The sound came back to me with a delay. Breathing 2 beat. Machine inhale. My exhale. The small gap, the seam, like a perfect knife. "Calm yourself," I said, and to prove to myself I could, I drifted up to the break room again and drained the thermos. The window gave me my reflection and beyond it a faint gray swath where the parking lot lights lifted the air. For a second, I thought I saw someone on the lot standing beside my car, facing the building with their head tilted a little, as if reading windows. It may have been a smear on the glass. I wiped the pane with a paper towel. When I looked again, the lot was empty. My breath on the glass phased out of time with the microwave's little fan. When I returned, I forced myself to ignore the book. I pressed the foot pedal to unlock the shelf tracks and rolled Section C open. The shelves moved with more resistance than they should have, as if something weighty had leaned against them from within. They yielded in increments, each click requiring a deeper push, until the aisle opened in a soft shudder and settled. A faint odor met me, damp that shouldn't have been there, a cellar smell under the scrubbed Anthropocene air. A plastic sign stenciled disaster boxes hung at the head, a neat row of cardboard kits meant to be used in floods and leaks. I remember thinking how comforting that felt. Emergency answered with a tidy plan. Then a whisper passed along the aisle, like a sleeve brushing metal. I peered into the gap between boxes. White. Absolute, I blinked. Not a wall, empty space, a trick of fluorescence. I leaned forward, too far, and my knuckles grazed the cardboard and made that skittering nail-on-paper sound I'd been hearing all night. Relief surged up and broke in little laughter that felt like weakness. My hand shook. I made it stop. I reached into the gap again to prove it was only a gap. Something touched my fingertips. Not a hand, not anything so describable. A pressure. A shaped emptiness, a colder dividend of the air that pressed back precisely where I pressed, as if the aisle wore a glove. It withdrew when I flinched away. The dehumidifier exhaled at the same instant, and the negative of the breath in the vents repeated it half a second later. Room, me, as neat as commas. I backed away. The instructions I hadn't intended to memorize rose with unpleasant clarity. If you detect the audit, do not grant it your name. Do not reflect yourself back to it. Stop reading. Stop. The next line had been partially torn out. It came back like a word that everyone around you knows but you've never learned. I closed my mouth on a stupid looping laugh and wheeled my cart back. I don't remember deciding to pick up the book. I remember the feel of it. A dry, almost papery cloth cover, edges sharp. The page where I'd dog-eared had altered. The typewriter lines I'd indexed in my head were shifted by a hair, as if the carriage had slipped. The warning note now read, "Readers are advised to maintain their distance from reflective surfaces. Do not read aloud. Mark your pauses for cataloging." I don't know if I swallowed or the room did it for me. A new paragraph had impressed itself onto the page as if it had always been there, lightly raised in the paper's basket weave. The unseen auditor is not a presence, but a process. It is not what comes through the gate. It is the gate in motion, the catalog itself. When you read with it, your attention becomes a handle. Your breath is the clip that binds. The break room window showed only the black. The elevator eyes looked at me with their useless number. The phone on my desk had one bar, regrettably. I texted my friend, a half-joke. Night shift archive update, found a cursed typography manual. If I start filing myself, tell HR. The message sent. 3 dots appeared, then faded, appeared, faded, as if someone were erasing them in a rhythm. The next part is a sequence, and I don't know if I remember all of it in the right order. The fluorescent light nearest my desk flickered, not a random stutter, but in a pulse. On, pause, off, pause, on. The exact cadence of a sentence in which commas had become breath marks. The printer across the room woke after a great sleep and spat a single label. I didn't hear the gears warm up, only the snap of adhesive hitting the tray. I had to look. The label was nearly blank, a white rectangle with a barcode that scanned to nothing. In the top right corner, one line of text, pending, accession. In the field where a description should go, a smeared rectangle as if someone had pressed a thumb. My name reached out of a narrow corridor, very softly in my voice but sanded a little by ductwork. I spun so fast my chair rolled and hit my ankle bone. Nothing in the corridor, nothing in any of the narrow wired glass windows, but those tiny dots where someone not quite me was supposed to be. "Okay," I said, and I heard the period. I felt the room drink it. I knew, in a way the body knows a stove is hot before the mind frames the rule, that if I spoke my name, if I gave the process a label, if I let my mouth shape it, it would have me in a healthier, more sortable way. I clamped my lips together and looked around for a countermeasure. There was a line in the manual I hadn't meant to memorize, probably because it was ridiculous. To close the gate, fill the gutters with noise. Noise I could do. I dragged the cart to the microfilm reader, switched it on. Its lamp battered the dark into granules. I cranked the reels so the film rasped, flooding the room with a low river of sound. The printer, obliging for once, rattled. I turned on the pallet jack and let it beep its defiant little reverse beep. The microwave in the break room bleated. I punched its panel to make it complain. The ductwork rose to the occasion with an offended shiver. The building had been designed for quiet, but a room with things in it can always be made to clatter. It slowed the pulse in the lights, but didn't stop it. The commas kept coming, patient as a metronome. I flipped through the manual with clumsy fingers, searching for more advice, but the paragraphs had rewrapped as if someone had fiddled with the margins. If you can write, write over the spaces, a sentence advised. Seal the gutters, close the white. I looked at my pen, illegal near the materials, and held it over the page. The nib hovered, then touched. The ink bled into the basket weave of the paper, a beautiful black spider of violation. I scribbled in the margins, cross-hatched the leading, filled every hole I could see. I smeared a black thumb in the blank until the whorl of my print turned into a fog. The empty space in the aisle pressed up against the boxes again like a held breath. If the thing was not a creature but a process, then the process would be to take unstructured material and bring it into order. This is what we do in archives: name, date, describe, box. The manual wasn't summoning a ghost, it was inviting a mechanism to do its work on me. The only part of me it could reach was the part that worked in the same direction. The formula in the book, the breath, the commas, the line breaks, was exactly the shape of my habit when I read. The thing could only move where my attention made a path. If I stopped following the pattern, if I broke the function of reading, if I refused to be tidy, I could slip off its chart. Which is to say, I stopped breathing where the commas told me to. Do you know how hard it is to unlearn a rhythm you've practiced since you were 6? I read a paragraph diagonally, letting my eyes skid in rude arcs. I inhaled in the middle of clauses and exhaled into hyphens. I resisted the pull of the paragraph break, physically refused to let my chest empty when the line ended. I recited, under my breath, a list of all the stupid names of snacks the break room used to have before the vending machine was removed. Choco Blast, I whispered, Honey O's, Citrus Fizz, meaning nothing by them, keeping no accounts. I dragged a fingertip along the page and wrote nonsense in the ink, like a child who has decided to fall screaming to the floor until the math lesson ends. The typed lines seemed to fuzz, not vanish, but lose their bite, as if the very notion of a baseline had tired. The flicker in the fluorescent staggered, then fell out of time. The label printer clicked twice, and embarrassed, fed the blank rectangle inward as if swallowing its own tongue. The pressure in the aisle withdrew like a hand deciding not to touch. The dehumidifier's breath caught, and for 2 heartbeats went silent. Machines don't pause like that. They whine or they die. But this one paused, and the room held, and the black window of the break room felt less like a hole and more like glass again. I set the manual down and put both palms flat on it and held it there as if pinning a wasp. I forced myself to count not in neat, even numbers, but in a sequence only I knew: 3, 5, 11, 2, 9, until my own urge to correct it made my teeth ache. I kept my mouth closed on the period of my counting and felt nothing drink. Something brushed my shoulder. I turned and found only the chain of the light, knocking from the airflow. It touched my shirt and backed off. In the little window of the corridor door, there was only my reflection. Too small, yes, but obedient. My phone chimed. The message I'd sent had a reply now. Lol, my friend had texted. Don't get alphabetized. I laughed too loud, and the laugh felt like it slowed the room, like it rubbed the pattern the wrong way. The manual's last page fell open on its own. I swear I didn't touch it. The paper had been subtly trimmed along the outer edge, the way you trim a document you mean to put in a binder. 3 small half circles were punched, but off by a hair, so a standard ring would bite into the paper. At the bottom of the page was a final line in smaller type: Do not discard. If you have read this far, you are in the record. Your file is open until the audit closes your breath. It closes in commas. No. I pressed the page down, and against training and policy and every neatness in me, I tore it. The sound was beautiful. It was the sound of a seam unlearning itself. I tore across the text, across the clean typewriter O's and L's, across the diagram of gutters. I tore the page again into quarters, then again until the pieces were confetti, and I let them fall onto the laminate desk, into the disorder of my labels and notes and the lingering coffee smell. The ventilator pulled in a long, unsteady drought. The beat in the fluorescent light stopped. The elevator, far down the hall, gave a single metallic gasp as if someone had hit a button and then thought better. I felt the room notice that I was not participating and, with a shrug, decide to move on. There's a sequence to the end, too. I turned off the microfilm's lamp and listened to the dark ungranulate. I put the printer to sleep. I gathered the photographs from the one fallen box and put them back in careful order. I rolled the shelf closed and engaged the brake with a clean click that landed like a full stop. I put the manual of inductions into a disaster box and closed the lid and slid it under the table. I'll confess I wrote a label, trash. It made me feel better to violate structure in a tidy way. At 4:43, my phone alarm nudged me to begin closing tasks. I did them. When I stepped into the elevator, the number flicked to G and stayed there. The doors closed with the hush you want doors to make. My face in the mirror was my own, crisp and reluctant and sleep-sanded. I held my breath at random times to practice and felt no one count. The pre-dawn air outside had the dampish mineral draft of a city tired of pretending it sleeps. The parking lot's lights went out, in a wave not paced to anything I could name. The cemetery's black cypress leaned in a mild breeze. My car unlocked itself, or rather I hit the key and watched it admit me. The engine turned over. The heater lifted the smell of dust and old hand lotion. When I put the car into reverse, the backup camera showed the rib cage of the empty lot. Nothing moved within it. The frame lines were calm, the margins tight, the white held where it should. On the drive home, the radio offered me one song and then another, and when the DJ spoke, her sentences ran long like river water. I parked on my street and climbed my apartment stairs and let myself into the room whose quiet had always been mine. The books on the shelf sat at mild angles. The rug was skew. The window showed the dull orange of clouds. I paused in my doorway and waited for something to eat my period. It didn't. I slept badly. At first because of adrenaline, and then because of a stranger thing, a need to put my breath somewhere it couldn't be counted. I fell asleep on my back with my mouth open like a kid exhausted after a day at the pool. I dreamed of a ledger with my name missing from it, not because it had been erased, but because it had never belonged there to begin with. I woke to the fricative hush of cars on wet pavement and felt, for a breath or two, entirely unalphabetized. That should be the ending. It would be if I'd thrown the manual away. I didn't. The habit that kept me from using a pen near collections kept me from discarding any printed material with a stamp in it. The disaster box sits under my desk. I tell myself keeping it in the box breaks the chain. I tell myself the instructions don't work if you aren't in a room that obeys the rules. I tell myself the commas are only commas. I have told myself these things until the edges of the sentences feel soft with use. Today at lunch, I caught myself reading a menu in a rhythm that made the hairs on my forearms lift. Inhale for clauses with ingredients. Exhale at the prices. The napkin holder's chrome showed the veiled outline of my face and one other face not quite aligned with mine, taller by a dot. I closed my mouth in the middle of the sentence and laughed because it was ridiculous. No one noticed. The restaurant was loud. The gutters were full. When I got home, there was a single unmarked label stuck to my mailbox, perfectly centered. A white rectangle with a smear in the place where a description should go, as if a thumb had pressed there. I peeled it off and stuck it to the inside of the disaster box lid because every process is happier if it has somewhere to live, and I am done being a good host. Tonight, as I write this down, I am writing, yes, and I am filling the gutters with noise between the words. There is a pause in the apartment when the refrigerator settles and the whole place breathes once heavy, and I close my lips and refuse the period. If you ever find a book like mine, a manual that wants to turn your living into a filing, remember there is a way to survive, but it is not about saying the right words in the right order. It is about making a wrongness so sustained the process cannot get a purchase. Break the rhythm, kick the commas, write in the white. Laugh not because you are brave, but because laughter is ragged and eats the rules. Leave your chair at an angle, tilt your frames, keep your name in your mouth. If you must read, read like a child who hates the lesson, off-tempo and rude, skimming and scrawled. And if, in the days that follow, you feel something draw close when you pause to breathe, if the light above your desk favors a cadence and the printer offers you a blank with a smudge, step aside from the sentence and let it run without you. When you come to the next comma, do not give it anything.